Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the fairy tales you thought you knew take a darker turn. Tonight, we begin the eerie tale of Pinocchio, not the cheerful puppet of bedtime stories, but a creature born of loneliness, secrets, and something not quite human. So dim the lights, close your eyes, and listen while you sleep. In a crooked village nestled between a black marsh and a skeletal forest, there lived an old man named Gepta. He was not beloved nor hated, only watched from windows as he limped past with a crooked back and a cart of rusted tools. They said he had once carved wonders in the city, but grief had hollowed him like one of his marionettes. His house, a leaning shack cobbled together with wood of mismatched colours and scents, reeked of turpentine and varnish. Inside, puppet limbs hung from hooks like butchered chickens, swaying slightly though the air stood still. But one evening, Gepta found something unusual in the forest, a piece of pale wood, smoother than bone and warm to the touch. Though no sun had shone that day, it was shaped like a femur. He brought it home. Gepta did not carve with joy, only obsession. The wood demanded his attention. When he touched it, it hummed like a distant voice caught beneath water. At night, he dreamt of eyes blinking in the grain and mouths whispering from the cracks. Still, he carved. First, a head, long and angular, with sunken cheeks and a sharp nose. He had not intended the eyes to be hollow, but they were deep, empty sockets that watched without pupils. Then the torso, long limbs, brittle fingers. By candlelight, Gepta whispered as he worked, as if someone were whispering to him. It was nonsense at first, but as the puppet took shape, the whispers formed words. Flesh is a lie, strings a truth. Carve me real, let me in. He named it Pinocchio, as he had once promised to name the child he never had. But even before the final joint was slotted into place, the puppet twitched. Its limbs didn't jerk like a toy, but moved with eerie fluidity, as if memory coursed through tendons that weren't there. On the seventh night, as thunder bruised the sky and the marsh moaned outside, Pinocchio stood, not by magic, not by Gepta's hand. He simply rose. "Father," it rasped, a voice dry like insects crawling through parchment. Gepta dropped his chisel. "You speak?" Pinocchio tilted his head. "You made me. I will make you proud." It grinned. Its teeth were not carved. The villagers noticed changes. The old man no longer limped. He walked straighter, faster. His eyes, once dim, now gleamed with something close to delight, but not quite. He spoke to no one, but at night, strange music poured from the house, not notes of joy or sorrow, but hollow tones like bones clacking against bone. Some swore they saw shadows dancing in the windows, long-limbed and stringless. One child, curious, crept to the window and peeked inside. She didn't return. Her shoes were found in the mud outside Gepta's door, clean, except for a single splinter stuck in the leather. The constable visited, of course, knocked, waited, shouted. Eventually, the door opened, and there stood the old man, smiling with eyes too bright. "Is something wrong, officer?" Behind him stood the puppet, still, unmoving, mouth slightly open, as if mid-laugh. But it wasn't the puppet's face that disturbed the constable. It was the fact that its hands were wet. That night, Gepta sat beside the puppet, stroking its cheek with a trembling hand. "They're growing suspicious," he said. Pinocchio turned toward him. "Let them. I only need one thing, father." "What?" "A real soul. You gave me strings. I want the rest." Gepta's hand stilled. "I don't have one to give." Pinocchio tilted its head, and the air in the room thickened. From the corners came the sound of wood creaking, though nothing moved. The air smelled of rot and old wax. "Then I'll borrow one." The next morning the village bell rang, not for a wedding, not for a celebration, but a funeral. The constable was found in his bed, body stiff, eyes wide open. Splinters lined his gums. His tongue was missing. No one knew where to look, so they buried him without answers. But late that night, as fog rolled through the alleys and the marsh groaned like a dying man, someone or something walked through the village, barefoot, dragging something behind them. If anyone looked out their window, they said they saw the old puppet dancing, but it had no strings. It no longer howled. It whispered. It didn't rustle the trees. It seemed to watch them. The forest leaned closer each night, and shadows crawled longer across the cobblestones. The villagers, once dismissive of Gepta's strangeness, now hurried past his home without looking. Children were kept indoors. Windows were shuttered by dusk. Still more disappeared. A baker, a mute girl, an elderly widow whose cane was found standing upright in her doorway, her shoes filled with sawdust. And each time a new puppet appeared in Gepta's window. They weren't toys, they were replicas, uncanny likenesses of those lost, their mouths always open, their eyes rolled upward, painted with that same lifeless glaze. One puppet had a tongue that twitched on its own, and one had teeth that weren't carved. Inside the shack, Pinocchio stood without motion. His creator had tried to make him rest, to sit, to sleep, to obey. But the puppet didn't respond to commands. He moved when he wished, ate nothing, slept not at all. Yet he grew, not in size, but in complexity. Where once he had smooth joints and carved lines, now there were subtle creases along his arms. His fingers had grain patterns that mimicked veins. His face had begun to change. The nose shortened, the jaw narrowed, the eyes, still dark hollows, seemed deeper now, as though something behind them was slowly moving forward, learning how to wear a face. Gepta stared at him from across the room. "What are you becoming?" he asked one night. Pinocchio blinked. It was a slow, deliberate gesture. "I am becoming enough," he said. "Enough to wear the soul I take." One night, Pinocchio wandered, not away from the house. He didn't need to. Instead, he went down. There had once been a cellar beneath the shack, long bricked up and forgotten after the plague. But the bricks were old and the mortar brittle, and Pinocchio's fingers were stronger than stone. Gepta heard the breaking. He followed with a lantern, heart thudding. He found the puppet standing in a dirt chamber lit by flickering roots that glowed, pulsing with faint yellow light. The earth was damp, and the air smelled of mould and memories. Carved into the soil walls were hundreds of faces, not sculptures, not exactly, impressions, as if something had pushed against the dirt from the other side. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes bulging. Pinocchio ran his fingers across them lovingly. "They're almost ready," he said. Gepta trembled. "What are they?" "Souls without homes. You buried them in wood. I will give them skin again." Above the cellar, the villagers formed a council, hushed voices around a hearth. They could no longer ignore what was happening. The boy went in and didn't come back. The girl too. "That puppet looks like my sister, exactly like her. What if he's using them? The woodworker, what if he's binding something wrong into them?" An old priest, face gaunt and voice brittle, shook his head. "No," he said. "He's not binding. He's releasing." "What do you mean?" The priest stood. "I'll show you." That night, they returned with lanterns, 6 men and 1 priest, walking toward the shack like mourners at their own funeral. But they found the house empty. The fire still burned. Tools still lay scattered. The puppet still hung, some twitching faintly, but Gepta was gone. No sound, no resistance, just an absence too deep to be natural, until one of the villagers opened the back door and found the trail. Splinters, shards, a line of them winding through the dirt like breadcrumbs. They followed it into the woods. The fog swallowed their lights within minutes. Trees leaned close, pressing against their sides. Sound shifted. Wind became voices. The rustle of leaves became whimpers. At last, they reached a clearing. There stood a tree, but it was no ordinary tree. It was twisted, bark pale and smooth as skin. Its branches ended in fingers. Its trunk bulged in places, faces pressing outward from within. And at its base sat Pinocchio, still, waiting. Gepta was beside him, slumped. His eyes were open, lips parted in shock. In his chest, a hole had been carved, delicate, precise. Inside was only wood shavings. Pinocchio turned to the men. "Father gave me his last gift," he said. The priest fell to his knees. "It's not a puppet," he whispered. "It's a hollow link, a woodborn, an empty child. They were carved to hold spirits that could not rest, but they were outlawed centuries ago." Pinocchio stood, and behind him the tree groaned. Branches twisted, mouths opened, and the wood began to speak. Only 2 men made it back to the village. They screamed of walking wood, of the tree that grew from screams, of puppets made with breath and bone, of Pinocchio who walked without strings and called himself Real. One gouged out his own eyes, the other stopped speaking altogether. But that night, a new puppet appeared in the shack window, not of a child, but of a priest. Its fingers were crossed in prayer, its tongue was made of braided rosary. Back in the woods, the tree spread its roots deeper, and the faces in the cellar wall began to smile. They didn't hold funerals anymore. There weren't enough bodies. Some villagers fled, dragging carts and children through the hills, past the chapel and over the river where the fog didn't reach. Others stayed, barricading homes and whispering prayers to gods that had long since stopped listening. But it didn't matter. The hollowing didn't need open doors. It only needed your name. It began with whispers in the walls, not voices, wood creaking, like floorboards shifting under invisible feet, like beams moaning beneath a weight that wasn't there. In the night, families would wake to find toys rearranged, pictures turned backward, the scent of sap in their bedrooms. And outside, always just outside, came the clicking of jointed limbs. Pinocchio was patient. He did not knock. He didn't need to. He watched and waited, because now he was learning to choose. One night, the village midwife woke to find her husband gone. The sheets beside her were still warm, his boots still by the door, but the cradle was full. Inside it lay a puppet. It had her husband's eyes, carved, but too perfect, painted, but weeping. The puppet reached up, mouth opening and closing like a newborn, and whispered, "Where's my soul?" They burned the house that night, but fire does not kill what has no lungs, what has no skin, what was never alive to begin with. The next morning, on the charred foundation, lay a new puppet, half melted, hair scorched, but still smiling. Its mouth was stuffed with ashes. Far beneath the village, the roots spread. The old cellar, once hidden, now pulsed like a heartbeat. The soil had become slick and black, feeding off memory and mourning. Pinocchio returned to it often. He didn't walk, he drifted. The world bent around him now. Wind reversed, shadows knelt. Even the earth, once firm beneath human feet, softened for him like flesh for the scalpel. Inside the chamber, the walls had changed. Where once were impressions of lost souls, now the faces grinned. They followed him as he moved, their mouths open, not in pain, but worship. One face, round, soft, childlike, spoke first. "Brother," it crooned. Pinocchio knelt before it. "You're nearly ready." "We want skin," the wall said. "And you'll have it," he whispered, "when I find the right one." There was one child left in the village. Her name was Lucetta. She was 5. She didn't cry much. She liked quiet places and the sound of old clocks. Her mother had died last year. Her father was going mad. and she could hear the wood talking late at night in the space between sleep and waking. She heard the tick-tock, not of a clock, but of something far deeper, a rhythm, a call. The children used to sing of it. Carve me softly, carve me sweet, I'll rise upon my wooden feet. If you lie, I'll know it true, and take your tongue to silence you. Lucetta never sang it aloud, but she dreamed it, and in those dreams a puppet watched her from the forest line. It never moved, but every night it got closer. The mayor ordered the woods burned, dozens of torches, buckets of pitch, men with iron tools. But the fire didn't take. The fog grew wet. The flame hissed and died as if choked. Trees bent together, shielding themselves with their own limbs. And in the silence that followed, a new sound rose. Laughter, not human, not joyful, but old, wooden, splintered. Lucetta's father boarded the windows. He painted symbols on the doors, old runes from the time before churches. He whispered apologies to gods that demanded blood, not prayer. And yet, one morning, Lucetta awoke to find a toy at the foot of her bed. It was carved in her likeness. Same red ribbon, same wool socks, same chipped tooth. It smiled without moving, and when she picked it up, she heard something inside it rattle like bones. That night, her father took the doll and went into the woods. He did not come back. The next morning, the puppet was gone from her bed, but the floor beneath the crib was stained black and smelled of pine. And Pinocchio stood at the edge of the trees. He bowed to her as if asking permission. Lucetta didn't scream. She simply turned her face away and said, "Not yet." Pinocchio tilted his head. He whispered, "Soon." Elsewhere, beneath the forest, the tree had changed again. Its bark now bore eyes, real ones, dozens. They blinked independently. Some bled, some wept, and below its roots, a single heart hung suspended in sap, still beating. Gepta's heart. Pinocchio visited it sometimes. He would press his head to it, listen to its rhythm, let it guide him. "Still loyal," he'd whisper, "still giving, still mine." In the village, an old woman was found, hanging by puppet strings over her own hearth. No marks of struggle, no signs of breaking, only a message carved into her floor with bone. "To be real, I need more." They tried to flee again, but the road was gone. Not blocked, not overgrown, gone. In its place were trees, perfect, symmetrical, unmarked, as though the world had never extended beyond the village at all. A wooden dome, a cage, and somewhere, high above, they swore they saw strings. Lucetta was the only one who could hear them. The strings hummed at night. They plucked melodies, not random, not cruel, purposeful. And the puppet, her puppet, now returned, began to change. Each morning it looked more like her. One morning it breathed. One night it blinked. In the dark The villagers no longer asked who would disappear next. They only asked who would replace them. A week passed without time. No sun rose, no clocks ticked. Every hour bled into the next like candle wax over old wood, and still the village stood, rotting inward, isolated, forgotten even by maps that once bore its name. The innkeeper hanged himself in the well. The water turned amber and sticky, too thick to drink. The chapel's bell rang without anyone pulling the rope. And the puppets, they multiplied, not just in Gefta's window anymore. They were found nailed to trees, hung on porch swings. One was discovered sitting in a church pew, hands folded neatly over its lap, carved tears on its cheeks. Each of them looked a little more alive. Each of them looked like someone, and every one of them was smiling. Lucetta no longer played. She sat in her room beside the growing puppet that bore her face, fingers curled tight in her lap. The doll didn't speak, not in words, but when she touched it, it responded. Its limbs warmed, its eyelids fluttered, and sometimes she saw it mouthing dreams she hadn't yet had. When she told the mayor, he wept. "Don't say such things, child. You're the last hope we have." "I'm the last," she said softly. "That's not the same." The fog had thickened to something nearly physical. You could run your fingers through it and come away wet with memory. People began forgetting names, faces, entire lifetimes. One man woke in the tavern cellar with no teeth, no tongue, and a puppet stitched to his chest like a parasite. It pulsed when he breathed. They burned him alive, but the puppet crawled free. Somewhere beyond the trees, Pinocchio watched. He sat in a clearing ringed by silent animals. Foxes, owls, wolves, all with empty eyes and wooden limbs. Creatures claimed by the forest's slow infection. He wasn't carving anymore. Now he was harvesting. The wood he used wasn't from trees. It came from people. Their bones, their memories, their forgotten days. Each puppet he shaped carried more than just a face. It carried a moment, a pain, a sin, a wish never spoken aloud. The grain remembered, and grain doesn't forgive. Beneath the old chapel, a secret door opened. The priest, long assumed dead, had been hidden in the catacombs, carving protection wards with his own fingernails. He was thin, ghost pale, and mad, but not wrong. The hollowling seeks completion, he croaked. He is not content with form. He needs truth. He needs suffering. He feeds on story. "What story?" the baker asked. "Your story," the priest hissed. All of it. They didn't understand. But Lucetta did. One night, she left her home, alone. No torch, no shoes, just her, and the puppet now walking at her side. It didn't speak, but it mirrored her steps. Even its breathing matched hers. She walked through the fog, through the trees, past the places where names had once meant safety, into the hollow clearing where the heart tree pulsed. Pinocchio was there. So was the first puppet, the one that had once been Gefta. It was nailed to the tree's trunk, arms wide, eyes open. It smiled when it saw Lucetta. "You are real," it said to her. Lucetta nodded. "And you're not." Pinocchio stepped forward. His voice had changed, deeper now, echoing, not just from his mouth, but from the roots beneath. "I'm what's next." Lucetta didn't run. Instead, she held out her hand. "You want to be real?" she asked. Pinocchio nodded. "Then take it," she said. He reached, but before he could touch her, the doll beside her stepped in between. It looked at him, and it shook its head. "No," the doll said. "She is not yours." Pinocchio recoiled. "You are mine," he hissed. The doll smiled. "I was, but now I remember what I was before." The grain in Lucetta's puppet had come from an old tree, older than the heartwood, older than the curse. It remembered a time before the hollowing, before lies, before stories had weight. Lucetta's doll placed its tiny hand against Pinocchio's chest, and Pinocchio staggered. A splinter split across his cheek. His eye twitched. "No," he whispered. "I am the child. I am the story. I was carved to hold." "You were carved to consume," the puppet interrupted. "But I was carved to protect." The roots twisted. The tree howled. Faces peeled from its bark and screamed in hundreds of tongues. Lucetta stepped back as the soil split open, revealing the cellar beneath, now fully consumed by living wood, and the faces in the wall. They opened their eyes and began to chant, not in fear, in worship. Pinocchio fell to his knees. He looked at Lucetta, not with hatred, but with longing. "You could have saved me," he whispered. Lucetta's eyes filled with tears. "I know." He bowed his head, and the puppet, her puppet, climbed onto his shoulders, placed its hands over his eyes, and began to carve, not with blades, but with memory, with pain, with truth. And the forest held its breath. They say the first lie ever told wasn't by a man, it was by wood. The tree that bore it was old, older than death, older than the moon. It whispered to the wind that it could be anything: fruit, shelter, hope. But when the wind touched it, the tree pulled back, and so the wind called it cursed. From that tree, the first puppet was carved. Lucetta awoke in her own bed. The puppet was gone, but her hands were stained with sap, dark, almost black, and warm. Outside, the village had changed. The fog had lifted, just slightly. The streets were no longer twisted in impossible ways. Doors led where they should. Names were remembered again, at least for a while. But no one spoke of what happened in the clearing, because no one else remembered it. Only Lucetta and the puppet, wherever it had gone. The priest emerged from the chapel and declared a mass. "What do we pray for?" someone asked. "For forgiveness," he said. "Not for ourselves, for the story we've become part of." In the woods, beneath the roots of the bleeding tree, Pinocchio's body twitched, The puppet had carved something into him that the hollowling had never known before. Regret. It infected him like rot. He clawed at his chest. His limbs jerked out of rhythm. His face cracked, not from damage, but from emotion he was never meant to feel. Why would she refuse me? He asked the heart tree. The roots wrapped around him, cradled him, but gave no answer, because the tree itself had begun to fear the truth now inside him. The dolls in the village stopped moving. They sat limp in windows, on shelves, in cribs, no longer whispering, no longer mimicking. One by one, they began to crack, tiny fractures along the seams of their mouths, and inside each fracture was a seed, not of trees, but of memory. Lucetta began to hear stories in her sleep, not dreams, narratives, spoken in her own voice, about people she never met, in places she'd never seen. A woman burying her wooden child in a salt field, a soldier who carved his regrets into a totem that bled every new moon, a god made of bark who demanded lies instead of offerings. Each story felt real. Each one ended the same way. And then the puppet opened its eyes. The mayor called a meeting. "We need to burn the forest," he said again. "No," said Lucetta. "The fire won't touch it. It's not made of wood anymore." "What is it then?" She didn't answer, but in her pocket she carried a single splinter. It pulsed when she spoke. Far beneath the tree, Pinocchio made something new, a puppet of Lucetta, not in mockery, in remembrance. This time he carved carefully, with reverence, with pain. He shaved the wood so thin it nearly bled. He whispered to it as he worked. "You'll be the last," he said, "and maybe the first." When it was done, the puppet opened its eyes and smiled. That night, the villagers heard singing, not from the chapel, not from any house, but from beneath the ground. Voices in harmony, dozens, then hundreds, each one different, yet all bound by the same melody. Make me soft and make me kind. Let me wear your grieving mind. Stitch me up and hold me near. I'll feed your hope, I'll drink your fear. Lucetta dug up the old roots behind her house. She followed them, deeper than she thought possible, down into a tunnel of bark and bone. She walked for hours. At the end of it, she found a door, not carved, but grown. When she touched it, it opened like skin. Inside, she found herself. The puppet that looked like Lucetta was hanging by strings, but it smiled when it saw her. "You came," it said. Lucetta nodded. "Am I you?" the puppet asked. "Maybe. Or are you me?" Lucetta reached out and touched its wooden face. "Does it matter?" Behind her, Pinocchio appeared, but he no longer looked the same. His limbs were cracked, his voice faltered. Something was missing from him. "I gave her a part of me," he said, "and now I am no longer whole." "You were never whole," Lucetta said. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, his voice trembled. "Then help me become something else." The puppet of Lucetta reached down and pulled the string from its own chest. It offered it to Pinocchio. He took it, and the string vanished into him like smoke. His joints locked, his eyes glazed. He looked up and whispered, "I feel wrong." "Good," said Lucetta. "You're starting to feel at all." The puppet behind her moved. Not her twin, a new one. Small, barely shaped. Just a face, no limbs, but alive. It opened its mouth and screamed. In the village, the dolls began to move again, but they were different now. Some wept, some tore themselves apart, others looked at their owners with recognition and whispered, "You lied." Lucetta fled the chamber. Behind her, the face kept screaming. Pinocchio didn't follow. He sat cradling the twin puppet, mouth open as if praying. But to what? To the grain? To the lie? Or to something not yet born? When Lucetta emerged from the tunnel, dawn had broken, the first true dawn in weeks. She looked up, and above the village the strings were gone. But in the trees, something new had begun to grow. Tiny faces carved into the bark, watching, waiting. The morning light did not feel real. It painted the village in a pale, lukewarm yellow, like old oil left too long on the stove. Birds sang, but their notes were off, too perfect, too evenly spaced, as if a child had written their song into a music box. Lucetta watched the trees sway in rhythm. Nothing natural moved in rhythm, not unless something else was pulling the strings again. The mayor was gone, not missing, erased. No one remembered his name, not his wife, not his child, not even the plaque that bore it in the town hall. In his place stood a scarecrow made of alder and ash. On its chest was a knot of bark carved into a single word, lie. The priest nailed shut the chapel doors. He stood on the roof, hands lifted to the sky, muttering old prayers that tasted like bark and iron. "We're beyond grace now," he told the gathering crowd. "We have entered a covenant." "With who?" the blacksmith asked. The priest pointed to the woods. "With the one who listens, deep beneath the roots." Pinocchio was building again. Not puppets, not toys, a throne, each leg carved from pieces of his former selves, limbs he no longer needed, eyes that had seen too much. At its base, the puppet twin of Lucetta sat cross-legged, whispering fragments of forgotten dreams. "Do you want to be king?" she asked him. Pinocchio looked up. "No," he said, "I want to be believed." In the village, children began speaking, in voices that weren't theirs. They told stories in the square, half-remembered folk tales, twisted with blood and roots and names no one taught them. One boy recited the story of a girl who swallowed a splinter and grew a forest inside her lungs. Another described a tree that fed on confessions and bore fruit shaped like tongues. The adults laughed at first, then they stopped laughing, because one by one those tales began to come true. Lucetta visited her mother's grave, but there was no stone, only soil. The grave marker had grown legs and walked away. She found it days later, resting against a crooked birch near the edge of the forest. It blinked when she approached. "I remember you," it said. "You used to believe in me." Lucetta sank to her knees. "I still do." "Then believe harder," it whispered, "because it's coming. The part of the story that wants to replace you." The faces in the trees watched without blinking. At night, they hummed. No melody, just pressure, enough to bend the mind toward forgetting. Some villagers woke without names, others without reflections. The well turned black again, and this time it whispered back when spoken to. The puppet Lucetta returned to the village. She stood in the square and didn't move, but whenever someone looked away, she was closer, first at the fountain, then at the bakery, then inside someone's house. She never knocked. She didn't need to, because she belonged. Pinocchio sent his voice ahead of him, not his body, just his words. They came as wind, as creaking, as lullaby. "I will not lie to you," the wind whispered. "I will only tell you stories, and stories are more dangerous than lies." The priest cracked. He tried to cut out his tongue, to stop the stories from entering him, but it was too late. He bled sap, and when they opened his chest, they found a little door where his heart had been. It was locked from the inside. Lucetta visited the clearing again. The heart tree stood taller now, wider. At its centre was a hollow, like a womb, where light pulsed in time with breath. Pinocchio stood before it, carving the final piece of the throne. "You've grown," she said. He didn't turn. "I've become." "Become what?" He smiled. A crack ran through his face. "I was never just a boy. I was never just wood. I'm the hunger of belief, the shape stories take when they're left untended." He offered her the last piece, a crown of strings. "Join me." She held it, felt the pull, the promises of safety, of truth, of being remembered forever. But Lucetta shook her head. "I'm not a story," she said. "You are now." The puppet twin watched. She clapped once. The sound echoed like thunder, and from the roots of the forest came a flood of puppets, some broken, some beautiful, all with familiar faces. The villagers, every one of them, redone, retold, rewritten in wood. Lucetta ran, not out of fear, but because she understood. She wasn't the main character. She was the ending, and endings must choose. Burn the page, or become part of the next one. She returned to her house. It was gone. In its place stood a stage, velvet curtains, wooden seats, and a single spotlight. At the centre of the stage was her own chair, waiting. She sat. The lights dimmed, and the curtain rose. The puppet Lucetta stepped into view. She bowed and began to speak. "Once upon a time, there was a girl who dreamed of being real. The forest no longer ended, where the fields had once rolled into open air. Now stood walls of trees, tall, narrow, and growing closer with every blink. The world outside the village was swallowed. The roads faded, maps turned to blank pages. No matter how far you walked, you always returned to where you began. And in the centre of it all stood the theatre, pulsing like a heart, its curtains never closing. The villagers sat in the audience, but they were not themselves. They clutched programmes made of stitched leaves, their hands twitching with splinters. Their mouths were sewn shut with threads of gold. They didn't speak, they watched. On stage, the puppet Lucetta reenacted every moment of Lucetta's life, not with mockery, but with perfect detail, except one thing changed. Every choice Lucetta had made, the puppet made differently. Smaller decisions, quieter lies. The crowd wept behind their stitches. Backstage, Lucetta waited. She wasn't bound. She wasn't kept. She could leave if she wanted, but the door behind her no longer led to the world. It led to a corridor of endless mirrors, and every reflection blinked out of sync. In the hollow beneath the heart tree, Pinocchio stood at last, finished, not with carving, but with becoming. His body was no longer wood, no longer human, no longer either. He was shape, story, structure, a creature formed by belief and held together by expectation. He was what happens when you pray to something that never promised to be kind. The puppet Lucetta paused mid-performance. She turned to the audience. "There is a lie in this room," she said. The villagers began to twitch. One by one, they turned their heads toward the real Lucetta, who stood in the back row unnoticed until now. She ran, not out of fear, but because she understood. If she stayed, she'd be rewritten, not killed, not taken, but replaced. And replacements never remember they were anything else. She burst through the doors. The theatre crumbled behind her, not with noise, with silence. A collapse so complete it didn't even echo. Only dust remained, and a single puppet's hand poking out from the rubble, still holding a wooden quill. Lucetta stumbled through the woods. The trees made way, but not out of mercy. They were watching, testing. She passed the well. The water reflected not her face, but her future, a little wooden figure lying in a cradle of moss, eyes closed, waiting. She shattered the image with a stone. The water wept sap. The scarecrow mayor greeted her as she reached the village edge. He was taller now. His stitched mouth had opened, revealing a cavity full of clockwork and teeth carved with runes. "You left," he said. "No," she replied. "I stayed too long." He tilted his head. "You know what must happen next." Lucetta nodded. In the chapel, the priest's body still hung from the rafters, but it spoke. "I dreamed of strings," it rasped, "but they weren't tied to me. I was holding them, and you were all below me." Lucetta touched his chest. The door was still there. She knocked 3 times. It opened. Inside was a spindle, still turning, carving a story into thread. She reached in and cut it. The body dropped, and the story screamed. All through the village dolls burst open. From their bellies spilled parchment, etched with names and choices and unfinished endings. The wind scattered them like autumn leaves. Pinocchio felt it. He turned to the tree. "I gave them belief," he whispered. "Why won't they love me?" The tree did not answer, because the tree had begun to split, a great crack forming through its centre. From root to crown, something inside wanted out. Not him, something older, something that carved the first puppet with no hands. Lucetta returned to her old home. It was real again, but only barely. The walls flickered between wood and memory. She opened the drawer where her father kept his carving knives. There was only one now, and it pulsed when she held it. She carved a word into her palm. Truth. The village grew quiet. Even the trees stopped breathing. Lucetta walked to the heart of the woods, to the throne, to the hollow, to the end. Pinocchio stood before her, changed again, taller, eyes like whittled obsidian, voice like pages turning. "You can't stop the story," he said. "I'm not here to stop it," she said. "I'm here to finish it." She opened her hand. The word glowed in her palm, not with light, but with finality. She pressed it against his chest, and he shuddered. Cracks spider-webbed across his ribs, not from pain, from understanding. "What am I?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Lonely," she said. From the crack in the heart tree, something began to push through. A shape, too smooth to be bone, too warm to be wood. A face, but it wasn't hers. It wasn't his. It was every lie ever told in one form. A God not made of belief, but of denial. It opened its mouth, and the entire forest leaned closer to listen. Lucetta stood her ground. She held the carving knife. She held her story, and for the first time, she spoke her true name. Not the one she was given, the one she chose. The God faltered, the forest flinched, and the puppet wept, not from sadness, but because, for one heartbeat, he felt real. The God in the tree did not blink. It had no eyelids, only rings of polished bark, swirling inwards forever. Its face was wide and flat, carved smooth by centuries of whispered fabrications. There was no mouth, and yet it spoke. "You believed in me, even when you didn't know my name." Lucetta stood at the base of the heart tree, the carving knife trembling in her hand. The puppet beside her, Pinocchio, had fallen to his knees. He whispered, "I didn't mean to make you real." But the God didn't look at him. It looked at her. The sky above the forest peeled back like paper, revealing a void full of stories unfinished. Threads dangled from stars, tangled and pulling taut. The village behind them had frozen, puppets mid-walk, villagers mid-sentence, birds suspended in air like marionettes waiting for cue. Time had paused, not broken, just held. as if even reality was afraid of what Lucetta might choose next. Pinocchio stood. He looked less like a puppet now, more like a shadow wearing splinters. "I only wanted to be real," he said. "Is that so terrible?" Lucetta met his eyes. "You are real, but being real doesn't make you right." His expression cracked, not with sadness, with relief. The god opened its mouth wider. Inside was a stage, an empty one. Spotlights blinked on. Curtains waited. It was an invitation. "Step into your story," it said. "Tell it yourself, or I will tell it for you." Lucetta looked to the puppet. Pinocchio nodded. He knew. This was her story now. He had shaped it, twisted it, but he was never meant to finish it. He reached up, plucked a string from his own arm, and handed it to her. "A tether," he said, "so you don't forget who you are." She tied it around her wrist and walked into the mouth of the god, into the hollow, onto the stage. Inside, the theatre was infinite, rows upon rows of empty chairs, each seat etched with names she didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. Mother, sister, witch, girl who lied once, girl who lied again. On stage, a single stool waited. She sat. The god's voice rumbled from all directions. "Begin." Lucetta swallowed, then spoke. "I was not carved from wood," she said. "I was carved from silence, from stories I wasn't allowed to tell." The audience remained still. "I was told to be good, to be quiet, to believe in happy endings." She held up the carving knife. "I stopped believing." The knife glowed. "I started writing." The stage beneath her cracked. Roots pushed through the floorboards. But instead of consuming her, they formed a shape. A chair for a storyteller, a desk, a mirror, and a nameplate. Lucetta, daughter of no one. Outside the god's mouth, Pinocchio watched. The forest began to shed its bark. The trees uncoiled into paper. The clouds peeled back into ink. The entire world was rewriting itself, not as a lie, as a choice. The god whispered one final question. "What do you want to become?" Lucetta didn't hesitate. Not a girl, not a puppet, not a warning. She carved the final word into her palm with the blade. Author, the god, shattered, not violently, peacefully, like the sigh of a book closing at the end of a long story. The stage folded, the forest dimmed, and the strings let go. Pinocchio sat at the base of the tree, now hollow. He looked up. The stars were free again. He smiled, not with joy, with rest. The wind played through his chest cavity like a flute, and somewhere in that music was a lullaby. Lucetta emerged from the tree. She was not changed. She was not glowing. She was simply unchained. She walked through the silent village, past the scarecrow mayor, past the chapel, past her old home. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked until the trees thinned, until the world uncurled, until she was somewhere new. She carried no map, no name, no plan, only the carving knife the string on her wrist. In the clearing, beneath a sky full of waiting stars, she opened a blank book. She touched the page. The first word she wrote was once. The rest you'll hear in another story. If you dare listen while you sleep,